My name's James, and I've always considered myself a pretty average guy, a loyal husband, a hard worker, and someone who values honesty above all else. When my wife, Sarah, told me she was pregnant, I felt a rush of emotions, but none of them were joy. Don't get me wrong, I wanted to be happy. She was glowing, her face lit up with excitement as she waved the positive test in front of me. But all I could feel was confusion and doubt. You see, I can't have kids. That's not an exaggeration or a dramatic statement, it's a medical fact. Years ago, I was diagnosed with a condition that left me infertile. It was one of the reasons my first marriage fell apart. My ex-wife and I tried everything, tests, treatments, consultations with specialists, but it always ended the same way. There was no way I could ever father a child. Sarah didn't know about this. When we got married a year ago, I didn't see the point in bringing it up. She wasn't in a rush to have kids, and I figured we'd cross that bridge when we got to it. In hindsight, maybe I should have told her, but I honestly didn't think it would ever be relevant. Until now. So there I was, standing in our kitchen, staring at this plastic stick with two little lines on it. My brain was scrambling for answers, trying to figure out how this was possible. Had there been some kind of miracle? Maybe the doctors were wrong. Or, was there another explanation? Say something. Sarah said, laughing nervously. She probably thought I was too shocked to speak. And in a way, she was right. I managed to plaster a smile on my face and pull her into a hug. That's amazing news, I said, though my voice sounded foreign to me. Wow, I wasn't expecting this. She pulled back and beamed at me, completely oblivious to the storm brewing in my head. I wasn't either. I mean, I know we weren't exactly trying, but I guess the timing was just right. She giggled, her excitement bubbling over. I nodded, trying to process her words. The timing, I echoed. Later that night, after Sarah had fallen asleep, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. My mind was racing, replaying every conversation, every moment that could explain what was happening. Sarah and I had been busy with work, friends, and everything else that came with married life. We weren't exactly having sex every night. In fact, if I was honest, it had been infrequent at best. I tried to remember the last time we'd been intimate. It had to be about 6 weeks ago, maybe more. And yet, here she was, pregnant and glowing. Something wasn't adding up. The next day, Sarah was already on the phone with her family, sharing the big news. I sat across from her at the breakfast table, sipping my coffee and pretending to scroll through my phone. Every time she laughed or squealed, it felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe there really was an explanation for all this. Maybe I was being paranoid. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. As the weeks went on, Sarah threw herself into preparing for the baby. She started buying books, looking at cribs online, and talking about names. I did my best to play along, but every time she brought it up, I felt like I was suffocating. One night, as we sat on the couch, she turned to me with a dreamy look in her eyes. Can you believe it? We're going to be parents. I forced a smile. Yeah, it's unbelievable. She leaned her head on my shoulder and sighed. I know you're probably nervous, but you're going to be such a great dad. Her words felt like a punch to the gut. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe in us. But the doubts were eating me alive. That night, as Sarah slept peacefully beside me, I made a decision. I needed to know the truth. Whether it was medical or something else, I couldn't live with the uncertainty any longer. And so, my quiet investigation began. In the days that followed Sarah's announcement, I kept playing the role of the supportive husband. I congratulated her, rubbed her back when she felt nauseous, and even went with her to the first doctor's appointment. I was doing everything I was supposed to do, but inside, I felt like I was walking on broken glass. Something didn't feel right. Sarah had always been good at keeping things organized, but when it came to the pregnancy timeline, her answers seemed oddly vague. I remember asking her about when she first noticed something was off. "Oh, I don't know," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "It was just a feeling. I was late, and I figured, maybe it's time to check." I nodded, keeping my face neutral. But that didn't make sense. Sarah was meticulous about dates, she had a planner she updated religiously. Why would she suddenly be so casual about this? The questions started piling up in my head, but I didn't let them show. Instead, I played the long game. If there was something she wasn't telling me, I needed to catch it naturally. The first real crack appeared when Sarah left her phone on the counter one evening. Normally, she was protective of it, always keeping it close. But tonight, she was distracted, scrolling through baby clothes on her laptop. I stared at the phone, my heart racing. Was this my chance? I told myself it was just curiosity, that I wasn't doing anything wrong. After all, I had every reason to be suspicious, didn't I? So I picked it up, pretending I was looking for the time, and quickly opened her messages. Most of them were innocent, texts to her mom, her sister, a few coworkers. But then I saw one name that I didn't recognize, Evan. The last message from him was simple, "Talk soon." I felt a cold pit in my stomach. Evan. Who was Evan? "Babe, can you grab me some water?" Sarah's voice startled me, and I quickly put the phone down. "Yeah, of course," I said, forcing a smile. I handed her the water and watched as she returned to her laptop, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Evan could be anyone, a coworker, an old friend. But the timing felt too coincidental. The cracks were there, and now, I just had to wait for the pieces to fall apart. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about that text. Evan. Who was he? Why did Sarah never mention him before? The name swirled around in my mind like a bad melody I couldn't shake. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Sarah had a lot of friends and colleagues, and I couldn't expect to know every single one. But the timing was suspicious. Ever since she announced the pregnancy, I'd been hyper-aware of every word she said, every move she made. And Evan felt like a puzzle piece that didn't belong. One night, as we sat down for dinner, I decided to test the waters. "So," I said casually, stabbing at my salad with a fork, "I saw a name pop up on your phone the other day, Evan. Do I know him?" Sarah froze for a split second. It was subtle, but I caught it. She recovered quickly, smiling as she reached for her water glass. "Oh, Evan. He's just someone from work. You wouldn't know him." "From work?" I repeated, my tone neutral. "What does he do?" "He's in marketing," she said, too quickly. "He just joined a few months ago. Really nice guy. Married with kids, I think." Her response felt rehearsed, like she'd been preparing for this question. But I didn't press further. Instead, I nodded, filing the information away for later. The days after our dinner conversation felt like walking on thin ice. I tried to act as normal as possible, even though my mind was running in circles. Sarah's quick, rehearsed answer about Evan gnawed at me. Was it just paranoia? Or was there something she wasn't telling me? I decided to test her again, this time with something closer to home. One night, while we were watching TV, I casually mentioned my infertility. I said, pretending to be absorbed in the show, "It's kind of crazy to think about having a baby after everything I went through." Sarah turned to me, her eyebrows furrowed. "What do you mean?" "Well," I said, keeping my tone light, all the stuff I went through with my ex-wife. We tried for years, and it never happened." Her expression didn't change, but I noticed her grip tighten on the blanket she was holding. "Yeah, but things are different now, right? Sure, I said, shrugging. I just never thought it'd happen, you know. It's kind of a miracle. Sarah smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Well, miracles do happen, she said softly, turning her attention back to the TV. But I wasn't watching the screen. I was watching her. The tension between Sarah and me felt like a constant hum in the background. Every conversation was layered with questions I couldn't ask and answers she wasn't giving. But the more time passed, the harder it became to ignore the doubt clawing at me. That night, Sarah went to bed early, claiming she was exhausted. I waited, sitting in the living room with the TV playing quietly in the background, but my focus wasn't on the screen. My mind was spinning with everything that had been building up, the pregnancy, the name Evan, her nervous reactions. When I finally heard her soft snores from the bedroom, I knew it was time. I walked in, my steps quiet on the carpet, and saw her lying there peacefully. Her phone was on the nightstand, just a few inches from her hand. My heart raced as I reached for it. What if she woke up? What if I didn't find anything? Or worse, what if I did? My hand hovered over the phone for a second, and then I grabbed it, retreating to the far side of the room where the dim light from a bedside lamp illuminated the screen. The first few swipes through her messages felt like a false alarm. Conversations with her mom about baby names, photos sent to her sister of nursery ideas, and a boring back and forth with a coworker about a report. But then, I saw his name again, Evan. The latest message was short. Can't stop thinking about today. Let me know when you're free again. My stomach turned. I scrolled up, my hands trembling as the conversation unfolded in front of me. Wish we had more time, he had written 2 days ago. Sarah's reply, me too. I hate sneaking around, but it's worth it for you. My heart sank. Each message was another blow, confirming everything I had been dreading. They'd been meeting up for months. Some of the details were vague, coded language that only they could understand, but the tone was unmistakable. This wasn't just a casual friendship. I looked back at Sarah, still sleeping soundly, completely unaware that her lies were unraveling in real time. My grip tightened on the phone as I scrolled further, reading every word like it was a puzzle I had to solve. Can't believe I'm saying this, one message from Evan read, but part of me wishes the baby was mine. I froze. My eyes darted back to Sarah, her face serene in the glow of the lamp. Was this his way of joking, or was he hinting at something? The question pounded in my head. Was the baby his? I knew I couldn't confront her yet, not without a plan. My hands felt like lead as I carefully placed the phone back on the nightstand and crept out of the room. Sitting in the living room, I stared at nothing, the weight of the betrayal crashing over me. This wasn't just about an affair anymore. It was about the future she had been building with someone else, all while lying to my face. That night, I decided one thing: Sarah had no idea what was coming. The next morning, I sat across from Sarah at the breakfast table, nursing a cup of coffee I barely tasted. She was scrolling through her phone, humming to herself, oblivious to the fact that I'd read every word of her secret conversations with Evan. My mind was buzzing with questions. Should I confront her? Should I wait? How far would she go with her lies if I stayed quiet? For now, I decided to keep my cards close to my chest. Let her think everything was fine. So, I said casually, setting my mug down, "What's your schedule like today?" She looked up, startled, as if the question had caught her off guard. "Oh, just the usual. Work stuff. Maybe stopping by the store later." "Sounds good," I replied, keeping my tone light. "Anyone interesting at work lately? Any new faces?" She paused for just a moment, a blink and you'd miss it hesitation, before smiling. "Not really. Same old team." "Why?" "No reason," I said with a shrug. "Just making conversation." But I could see the flicker of nervousness in her eyes. She quickly changed the subject, steering the conversation toward baby names and nursery colors. I nodded along, but inside, I was boiling. Later that evening, I decided to plant a seed. Something small, just to see how she'd react. We were sitting on the couch, watching TV, when I turned to her and said, "You know, I was thinking about getting one of those ancestry kits." "Ancestry kits?" she repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Yeah," I said, keeping my voice casual. "You know, the ones that tell you about your family history, DNA traits, all that stuff. It's kind of cool, don't you think?" She gave a nervous laugh. "I guess. Why do you want one?" I shrugged. "Just curious. Plus, it might be interesting to see what kind of traits the baby could inherit, you know." Her smile faltered for a split second. "Oh, I don't know if that's necessary," she said, trying to sound nonchalant. "I mean, we already know so much about your side, right?" "True," I said, nodding. "But it's still fun to see it all laid out scientifically. And it's cheap. Just a little swab and boom, you get a whole profile." Her laugh was more forced this time. "I guess. But, maybe later, after the baby's here. It's not like we need to do it now." I nodded, letting the subject drop. But inside, I was screaming. She was nervous, too nervous. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. The cracks were starting to show. She was trying to hold everything together, but her lies were beginning to slip through. And I wasn't about to let her off the hook. The unease in our house had turned into a quiet, unspoken battle. Sarah was trying to hold everything together, but I could see the cracks forming. Her quick smiles, her nervous laugh whenever I mentioned anything even remotely related to the pregnancy or DNA, it was all starting to feel like a performance. And I wasn't buying it. I knew I couldn't just sit back and wait for the truth to fall into my lap. Sarah was careful, too careful, and if I didn't act soon, she might figure out that I was onto her. So, I decided to play a different game. If she wanted to lie, I'd give her a reason to stumble over her own lies. That morning, I started my plan. Over breakfast, I kept things light, talking about work, friends, and random things I knew would make her feel comfortable. I wanted her guard down. "Hey," I said casually, stirring my coffee. "I've been thinking, maybe we should throw a little dinner party for the baby. You know, invite both sides of the family, celebrate a bit." Sarah looked up, her fork paused mid-air. "A dinner party?" "Yeah, why not?" I said, feigning enthusiasm. "It's a big deal, right? Everyone's excited. We could even announce some of the baby stuff, names, nursery plans, all that." She hesitated, her smile faltering just slightly. "I don't know. It's still early, and I'm not sure if it's the right time for something like that." "Come on," I said, leaning forward. "It doesn't have to be big. Just the family, a nice meal, something simple. You know my mom's been dying for an excuse to cook her famous roast." She laughed nervously. "Well, I guess we could think about it. Maybe in a few weeks." I nodded, pretending to let it go, but her reaction told me everything I needed to know. The idea of a family gathering, where everyone would be asking questions, where her lies might be exposed, made her uneasy. And that unease was exactly what I was counting on. Later that day, I took it a step further. While Sarah was at work, I called her mother. It wasn't unusual for us to chat, I'd always made an effort to stay close to her family. But this time, I had a specific goal in mind. "Hey, Pam," I said when she picked up. "I wanted to run something by you." "Oh, hi, sweetheart," she said warmly. "What's up?" "I was thinking of organizing a little dinner to celebrate the baby. Nothing big, just family. What do you think?" Pam practically squealed with excitement. "Oh, that's a wonderful idea." Sarah didn't mention it, when were you thinking? Well, I said, choosing my words carefully. She seemed a little hesitant when I brought it up, so I thought I'd check with you first. Maybe you could help me convince her. Oh, don't worry, Pam said confidently. I'll talk to her. She's probably just being cautious, but it's such a lovely idea. I thanked her, hung up, and smiled to myself. I knew Sarah wouldn't argue with her mother. If Pam was on board, the dinner would happen whether Sarah liked it or not. And when it did, I'd be ready. The rest of the week, I kept my act up. I played the supportive husband, asking questions about the baby, offering to help with chores, and even pretending to be interested in her endless Pinterest boards of nursery ideas. But behind the scenes, I was preparing for the moment everything would come crashing down. I reached out to a lawyer to understand my options. I wasn't about to let Sarah walk away from this unscathed. If she wanted to lie, to cheat, and to try to pass off another man's baby as mine, she'd have to face the consequences. By the time the weekend rolled around, Pam had convinced Sarah to agree to the dinner. Sarah wasn't thrilled about it, I could see it in the way she avoided talking about the plans, but she didn't have much choice. The night of the dinner, I watched her like a hawk. She was putting on a brave face, laughing and chatting with her family, but I could tell she was on edge. Every time someone mentioned the baby, she'd stiffen just slightly, her answers clipped and careful. When my mom started asking questions about the due date and the timeline, Sarah's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Oh, it's still early, she said, brushing it off. We're just taking it one day at a time. I let the evening unfold, biding my time. I wasn't ready to pull the trigger yet, not until I had everything lined up perfectly. But watching her squirm, knowing that her lies were starting to catch up to her, was enough to keep me going. As the night wound down and the guests started to leave, I pulled Sarah aside. Hey, I said, keeping my tone light, thanks for going along with this. I know it wasn't your favorite idea. She gave me a strained smile. It's fine. I'm just tired. I nodded, letting her think she'd gotten away with it. But deep down, I knew the truth. The cracks in her story were getting bigger, and it was only a matter of time before everything fell apart. The morning after the dinner party, Sarah was unusually quiet. She moved around the house with a distracted air, her usual chatter replaced by one-word answers and half-hearted smiles. I could tell the evening had unsettled her, but I didn't press her about it. I wanted her to stew in the unease for a while. Meanwhile, I had work to do. The family dinner had been an opportunity not just to observe Sarah, but also to lay the groundwork for my next step. If Sarah wasn't going to give me the truth, I'd get it from someone else, someone who might unknowingly confirm what I suspected. That afternoon, I called Sarah's mother, Pam. Hi, Pam, I said cheerfully. Just wanted to say thanks again for helping organize last night. It was a great evening. Oh, it was wonderful, wasn't it? Pam said, her voice warm and enthusiastic. It's so exciting to see everyone coming together for the baby. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Yeah, it really is. By the way, I wanted to ask. Do you know if Sarah's been feeling okay lately? She seemed a little off last night. Pam hesitated for a moment. Well, she has been under a lot of stress. You know how she gets when things pile up. I smiled, keeping my tone casual. Of course. It's just that she's been so secretive about her doctor visits. I feel like I'm always the last to know what's going on. Pam chuckled. Oh, that's just Sarah. She's always been a bit private. But she told me everything's fine with the baby, so I wouldn't worry too much. Her words confirmed what I already knew, Sarah was hiding something. But Pam's tone held no suspicion, no hint that she was aware of anything unusual. Thanks, Pam, I said, steering the conversation toward lighter topics before hanging up. The next few days, I kept digging. I reached out to Sarah's closest friends, using subtle questions to gauge their reactions. So, has Sarah been talking much about the baby? I asked her best friend, Emily, during a casual coffee meetup. She's been so busy, I feel like I'm missing half the updates. Emily smiled but didn't meet my eyes. Oh, you know Sarah. She's probably just overwhelmed. But she's really excited. Her response felt rehearsed, like she was choosing her words carefully. I could tell she knew something but didn't want to spill it. Yeah, she is, I said, nodding. Has she mentioned anything about names? She's been keeping me in suspense. Emily laughed nervously. Not really. She's been kind of all over the place lately. But I'm sure she'll figure it out soon. Her vagueness only deepened my suspicions. If Emily, Sarah's closest confidant, wasn't willing to share details, it meant Sarah had either sworn her to secrecy or kept her in the dark as well. The final piece came from an unexpected source. Sarah's cousin, Lisa, called me later that week to thank me for the dinner party. By the way, Lisa said, her tone casual, I ran into Sarah a couple of months ago, and she looked so happy. She told me she'd been seeing someone special. I froze. Seeing someone special? I repeated, keeping my voice even. Yeah, she said it wasn't serious, just someone she was spending time with. I didn't think much of it, honestly. My stomach twisted. Lisa had no idea she'd just confirmed everything I suspected. Sarah had been seeing someone before she announced her pregnancy, and it didn't take a genius to figure out who that someone might be. Thanks for letting me know, Lisa, I said, masking my emotions. I appreciate it. After we hung up, I sat in silence, the weight of everything crashing down on me. Sarah's web of lies was unraveling faster than I expected. Now, I had to decide how to use this information. Should I confront her outright? Or should I wait until I had an opportunity to expose her lies in front of everyone? I chose the latter. If Sarah wanted to play games, I'd make sure I won. By now, Sarah's lies were like a house of cards, and I was ready to blow them over. But I didn't want to confront her directly, not yet. That would give her too much control. Instead, I needed to plant a seed, something subtle that would make her second-guess herself, expose her nerves, and ultimately push her into a corner. I waited until we were sitting together one evening, eating takeout and watching a movie. The atmosphere was relaxed, well, at least on the surface. My mind was racing, but I kept my demeanor casual. Hey, I said suddenly, as though a thought had just occurred to me. You remember that health screening thing I mentioned at work? She looked up from her plate, chewing slowly. Yeah. Why? They've started offering free DNA testing as part of it, I said, keeping my tone light. You know, ancestry stuff, health risks, all that. They said it's a great way to understand more about your genetics. Her reaction was immediate but subtle, too subtle for someone who didn't have anything to hide. She shifted slightly in her seat, her hand tightening around her fork. Oh, she said, forcing a laugh. That's interesting. I nodded. Yeah, and it's perfect timing, too. They said it can give insights into inherited traits, so I figured it'd be cool to see what the baby might get from me. Her smile faltered. I don't think those things are that accurate, she said quickly. Well, they're not perfect, I agreed, shrugging. But it's better than nothing. And hey, if I do it, maybe you could, too. It'd be fun to compare. Her laugh was strained now, and she avoided my eyes. I don't know, that stuff sounds kind of invasive. Invasive? I asked, tilting my head. It's just a cheek swab. She fidgeted with her napkin, clearly trying to think of a way to change the subject. I guess, if you really want to. But maybe later. You know, after the baby's here and things settle down. I nodded, pretending to let it drop. Yeah, makes sense. No rush. But inside, I was smiling. Her discomfort told me everything I needed to know. The idea of a DNA test terrified her, and that was as good as a confession. The next day, I escalated the game. While Sarah was at work, I casually mentioned the DNA testing to a mutual friend, someone I knew would bring it up in conversation. I didn't give them any details, just enough to plant the idea. "Yeah, they're offering these free health screenings at work," I said over coffee. "It's mostly for fun," but Sarah wasn't that into it. "I think it's fascinating, though. Could be cool to learn more about the baby's traits." The friend nodded along, and I could see the wheels turning. I didn't have to wait long for the results. That evening, Sarah came home looking more tense than usual. "Hey," she said as she walked in. "I ran into Lisa today. She said you were talking about DNA tests." "Yeah," I said nonchalantly. "I mentioned it in passing." "Why?" Her laugh was forced, her hands fluttering nervously as she set down her bag. "I don't know. It just seemed random. Like, why bring it up?" I shrugged, pretending not to notice her tone. "I thought it was interesting. And it's free, so why not? But like I said, no rush." Her eyes darted away, and I could see the panic creeping in. "Right. Well, I just don't think it's necessary. You know, with everything going on." "Of course," I said, smiling. "You're probably right." As the days went on, I kept the pressure subtle but steady. I dropped little comments about genetics, mentioned coworkers who'd done DNA tests, and even left the pamphlet from work lying on the kitchen counter. Each time, Sarah's unease grew more obvious. One night, as we were getting ready for bed, she finally snapped. "Why are you so obsessed with this DNA thing?" she asked, her voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. I turned to her, feigning surprise. "Obsessed? I'm not obsessed. It's just something I thought would be fun to do." "Why are you so worked up about it?" She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Instead, she looked away, muttering something about being tired and not wanting to argue. As I watched her climb into bed, her back turned to me, I felt a cold satisfaction. The carefully planted lie was doing its job. She was unraveling, bit by bit, and it was only a matter of time before the whole truth came tumbling out. And when it did, I'd be ready. After Sarah's outburst, I knew it was time to escalate things. I had been patient, but her lies were weighing heavier with every passing day. I wasn't going to confront her blindly, I wanted her lies to unravel in a way that left no room for denial. It was time to set the stage for the truth to come out in front of an audience. I decided to plan another gathering, but this time with a twist. It wouldn't be just a casual family dinner. I wanted Sarah to feel comfortable, to think it was just another evening of baby talk and celebration. But I also wanted key players present, her mother, her best friend Emily, and, if possible, the man I suspected was at the center of this mess, Evan. It was risky. If Sarah caught wind of what I was planning, she'd find a way to twist the narrative. But if everything went as planned, there'd be no escaping the truth. The first step was to organize the dinner. I approached Sarah casually one morning over breakfast, acting as if it was just an idea I'd come up with on the spot. "I was thinking," I said, spreading jam on my toast, "since the last dinner went so well, why don't we do it again? Maybe invite a few more friends this time." Sarah froze for a moment, then smiled nervously. "Oh, I don't know. I've been feeling so tired lately. Maybe we should wait until after the baby's here." "I get that," I said, nodding sympathetically. "But it doesn't have to be a big thing. Just a few people, close friends, family. Your mom loved the last one, and I'm sure she'd be thrilled to come again." Sarah hesitated, her eyes darting away as she stirred her coffee. "I guess, if it's small, it should be fine." I hid my satisfaction behind a sip of coffee. She was on edge, but she had no idea what I was planning. The next step was the guest list. I called Pam first, knowing she'd help convince Sarah if there was any resistance. As expected, she was excited about the idea and even offered to bring dessert. Then, I reached out to Emily. She was more reserved, clearly picking up on the tension that had been building between Sarah and me, but she agreed to come. The wild card was Evan. I didn't have his number, but I knew where he worked. Sarah had mentioned it during one of her hurried explanations. A quick online search gave me everything I needed. I sent him a casual email, posing as a coworker organizing a surprise party for Sarah and inviting him to join. I wasn't sure if he'd show up, but the seed was planted. If he came, it would be the final piece of the puzzle. The night of the dinner, the house was filled with the warm hum of conversation and laughter. Sarah was her usual charming self, playing the role of the glowing mother-to-be. But I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes flicked to me every so often as if she was waiting for something to go wrong. Pam and Emily were chatting in the living room, and I joined them, keeping the conversation light. I wanted everyone to feel relaxed, unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. Half an hour into the evening, the doorbell rang. "I'll get it," I said quickly, moving to the door before Sarah could react. When I opened it, there he was, Evan. He looked surprised, his eyes darting around as if he wasn't sure he was in the right place. "Hey, Evan," I said warmly, extending a hand. "Glad you could make it." He hesitated, then shook my hand. Thanks. This is for Sarah." He held up a small gift bag, his smile tight and nervous. "Perfect. Come on in," I said, stepping aside. As Evan entered the room, Sarah's face turned white. For a split second, she looked like she might faint, but she quickly plastered on a smile and moved to greet him. "Evan. What a surprise," she said, her voice high-pitched and strained. "Yeah, I didn't want to miss the celebration," he said, glancing at me. The room buzzed with introductions and small talk, but I could see the panic in Sarah's eyes. She avoided looking directly at me, keeping her focus on the guests. I bided my time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Evan's arrival had shifted the atmosphere in the room entirely. What had started as light-hearted chatter and laughter was now a strained and uncomfortable silence. Everyone noticed the tension, even if they didn't understand its source. I played it cool, greeting Evan warmly and ushering him into the dining room like he was an old friend. "Evan, why don't you join us?" I said, gesturing toward an empty seat directly across from Sarah. He hesitated, glancing at Sarah, whose face was a mask of forced composure. "Sure," he said, taking the seat. The dinner resumed, but the energy was completely different. Sarah barely touched her plate, her usual bubbly personality replaced by curt nods and strained smiles. Evan, on the other hand, looked like he wanted to melt into the background, answering questions in clipped sentences and avoiding eye contact with anyone. I kept the conversation light, asking Pam about her dessert recipe and joking with Emily about an old story. But underneath it all, I was watching Sarah like a hawk. Every time someone mentioned the baby, her grip on her fork tightened. Finally, I decided it was time to push things further. "So, Evan," I said, leaning back in my chair, "how do you know Sarah?" The room went still. Pam looked up from her plate, Emily glanced between the three of us, and Sarah froze mid-sip of her drink. "Oh, Evan stammered, his face reddening. "We, work together. In marketing." "Marketing?" I said, feigning surprise. "Sarah never mentioned you." Sarah jumped in quickly. "Well, there's no reason to. I mean, he's new, right?" I interrupted, keeping my tone casual. "Didn't you say he only joined a few months ago?" Sarah's eyes darted to me, wide with panic. "Yeah, that's right. It's not like we're close or anything." The lie hung in the air, and I let it linger. Evan shifted uncomfortably, staring at his plate. "Interesting," I said, leaning forward. Because I could have sworn you mentioned knowing someone named Evan when you went on that business trip a while back. What was it? 2 months ago. Sarah's face turned ghostly pale. I don't remember saying that. Pam frowned, her motherly instincts kicking in. Sarah, are you feeling okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. I'm fine, Sarah said quickly, her voice shaky. Just tired, that's all. I wasn't done yet. You know, it's funny, I continued, locking eyes with Evan. We've been talking a lot about genetics lately. Did you hear about the DNA testing program they're doing at work? Sarah's hand slipped, knocking over her glass of water. It tipped onto the table with a loud clatter, sending a cascade of liquid across the tablecloth. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, she exclaimed, leaping up to grab napkins. It's fine, I said calmly, reaching for a towel. No harm done. But the damage was already done. The room was silent except for the sound of Sarah frantically dabbing at the spill. I could feel the weight of everyone's stares, their confusion and unease. Emily broke the silence first. Wait. DNA testing? What's that about? Oh, just something they're offering at work, I said, my tone deliberately light. It's a fun way to learn more about inherited traits, health risks, and paternity, of course. Sarah froze mid-motion, her eyes snapping to mine. That's not funny, she said sharply. I wasn't joking, I replied, my voice even. It's actually quite fascinating. Imagine finding out exactly where the baby gets their traits. Wouldn't that be interesting? Pam looked between us, her expression growing concerned. What's going on here? Why are you talking about paternity? I turned to Sarah, giving her the chance to speak first. But she didn't. Her lips trembled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I think Sarah has something to tell us, I said finally, my voice cutting through the silence like a knife. Her head snapped toward me. Don't do this, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Do what? I asked, tilting my head. Tell the truth. Because if you won't, I will. Sarah's trembling hands clutched the soaked napkin as she stared at the table, avoiding everyone's eyes. The weight of the room was unbearable, every second stretching into eternity. Pam leaned forward, her brows knit with worry. Sarah, Pam repeated, her voice firmer this time. What's going on? What is he talking about? Evan shifted uncomfortably in his seat, glancing at Sarah but saying nothing. Emily looked between them, her confusion quickly morphing into suspicion. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. It's not what you think. Then tell us what it is, I said, my voice steady but cutting. She looked up at me, her face pale and tear-streaked. Please, not here, she begged. No, I replied, my voice firm. It happens here. Right now. Everyone in this room deserves to know the truth. Sarah's lips quivered as she glanced at her mother, at Emily, and finally at Evan, who was sinking lower into his chair. She let out a shaky breath, dropping the napkin onto the table. I made a mistake, she said, her voice cracking. The room collectively tensed. What kind of mistake? Pam asked, her tone sharp now, demanding answers. Sarah hesitated, her hands wringing in her lap. It wasn't supposed to mean anything. I didn't think it would, she broke off, her tears spilling over. It wasn't supposed to mean anything. I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. You cheated on me, Sarah. While we were trying to build a life together. And now, you're carrying another man's child. Pam gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Emily's eyes widened, and she looked at Sarah like she didn't recognize her. Evan shifted again, his face a mask of guilt and regret. I didn't know it would get this far, he mumbled, his voice barely audible. I turned to him, my anger bubbling to the surface. Didn't know it would get this far. I snapped. What did you think would happen, Evan? Did you think she could just lie to everyone forever? Sarah broke down, her sobs echoing in the room. I was scared, she cried. I didn't want to lose you. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. You didn't mean for it to happen. I repeated, my voice rising. You didn't mean to betray me. To lie to me. To carry on like nothing was wrong while making me believe this baby was mine. Pam stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. Sarah, is this true? She demanded. Is the baby not his? Sarah couldn't answer. Her sobs were the only response. Pam turned to me, her face pale with shock. Oh, my God, she whispered. I didn't know. Nobody did, I said, my voice cold. She's been lying to everyone. The room was heavy with silence once more, save for Sarah's muffled cries. Emily stood up, shaking her head in disbelief. I can't believe this, she said. I thought I knew you, Sarah. Evan finally spoke, his voice shaky. I'm sorry, he said, looking at me. I never meant to hurt anyone. I didn't know she hadn't told you. I turned to him, my anger sharp and focused. You didn't know. So, you just assumed it was okay to sleep with another man's wife? He looked down, his face flushed with shame. I'm sorry, he repeated weakly. Sarah reached out toward me, her hand trembling. Please, she sobbed. I'm sorry. I was scared. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to lose you. You already lost me, I said, stepping back from her grasp. I took a deep breath, the adrenaline coursing through me. This marriage is over, I said, my voice firm. I've already spoken to a lawyer. The papers are ready. I'll make sure you get the help you need for the baby, but don't ever expect anything from me again. Pam sank back into her chair, her face buried in her hands. Emily looked like she wanted to scream but held it in. Evan sat motionless, as if hoping he could disappear into thin air. Sarah collapsed into her seat, her sobs echoing through the silent room. The day after the dinner, the house was eerily quiet. Sarah hadn't said much after the confrontation, retreating to the bedroom and locking the door. I didn't follow her. I had nothing left to say. Instead, I spent the night on the couch, staring at the ceiling and replaying the evening over and over in my head. Her sobs, the looks of betrayal on everyone's faces, Evan's pathetic apologies, it was all burned into my memory. But beneath the chaos, there was a sense of clarity. The line had been crossed, and there was no going back. The next morning, I called my lawyer. Everything's in place, she said. We can serve her the papers this week. Are you sure you want to move forward? I've never been more sure, I replied. By the afternoon, I was ready. Sarah emerged from the bedroom, her face puffy from crying, and sat down across from me at the kitchen table. Can we talk? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, though I already knew what she was going to say. I'm sorry, she began, tears brimming in her eyes. I made a mistake, a horrible mistake. But I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose us. There is no us, Sarah, I said, my tone even. You made that decision the moment you lied to me. This isn't just about the affair, it's about the months of deception, about trying to pass off someone else's child as mine. I was scared, she pleaded. I thought maybe you'd never find out. And even if you did, I thought you'd forgive me. I let out a bitter laugh. Forgive you? You didn't just betray me, you took away my choice. You let me believe this baby was mine when you knew it wasn't. She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Please, she said. We can fix this. We can go to counseling, figure out a way to move forward. I shook my head. It's too late, Sarah. I've already spoken to a lawyer. The papers are ready. Her face crumpled, and she let out a choked sob. You can't mean that. What about the baby? What about everything we built together? I stood up, unable to sit there any longer. I'll make sure the baby has what they need, I said. But I can't be a part of this anymore. Over the next few days, the fallout was brutal. Pam called me several times, desperate to understand what had happened. I kept my explanations brief, sparing her the worst of the details, but I could hear the heartbreak in her voice. Emily reached out as well, though her tone was more cautious. I can't believe she did this, she said. You don't deserve this. Evan, to his credit, or perhaps out of fear, stayed completely out of sight. I hadn't heard a word from him since the dinner, and I preferred it that way. Sarah, on the other hand, swung between apologies and anger. Some days, she begged me to reconsider, promising to make things right. Other days, she lashed out, accusing me of overreacting and refusing to listen. But my resolve never wavered. The day the papers were served, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, anger, sadness, they all swirled together, leaving me numb. Sarah didn't speak to me when she received them. She simply locked herself in the bedroom again, her muffled cries audible through the door. I packed my things that evening. I didn't want to stay in the house any longer than I had to. As I zipped up my suitcase, I paused for a moment, looking around at the home we had built together. It was strange how quickly something so solid could fall apart. Before I left, I slid a note under Sarah's door. I'll always wish things could have been different. But I can't live a life built on lies. Take care of yourself, and the baby. Goodbye. And with that, I walked out, leaving the weight of betrayal behind me. The first week after I left was oddly quiet. For the first time in months, I didn't feel the constant tension of trying to uncover Sarah's lies. But with that relief came a strange emptiness. The apartment was small and sparsely furnished, and the silence hung heavy. Still, I reminded myself this was a new beginning. Sarah, on the other hand, was spiraling. Word of the dinner confrontation had spread through our social circle faster than I anticipated. Emily, who had been there that night, didn't hold back when others started asking questions. I couldn't believe it when he said the baby wasn't his, she reportedly told a mutual friend. And the way Sarah acted? She knew she was caught. She couldn't even deny it. The news hit Sarah like a freight train. Friends stopped returning her calls, and family members who had once adored her were now distant. Pam, her mother, was heartbroken but didn't defend her. You lied to all of us, Pam had said, according to Emily. How could you do this? How could you humiliate him, and yourself, like that? One afternoon, about 2 weeks after I left, Sarah called me. I hadn't expected it, but when her name flashed on my screen, I debated for a moment before picking up. What do you want, Sarah? I asked, my tone tired but not unkind. I need to talk to you, she said, her voice shaky. Please. In person. I sighed. Sarah, there's nothing left to say. Please, she insisted. I know I don't deserve your time, but I need to apologize. Properly. After a long pause, I relented. Fine. Tomorrow. At the coffee shop on Elm. Noon. The next day, I arrived early. The coffee shop was quiet, the scent of roasted beans filling the air. I took a seat near the window, my mind racing as I waited. Sarah arrived a few minutes late. She looked rough, her eyes were red and puffy, her usually pristine hair pulled into a messy ponytail. She sat across from me, clutching a tissue in her hand. Thank you for meeting me, she said softly. I nodded, waiting for her to continue. She took a deep breath, her hands shaking. I messed up. I ruined everything. And I know nothing I say can fix what I've done, but I need you to know how sorry I am. Her words didn't move me the way she might have hoped. I'd heard too many apologies by now, and they all rang hollow. You didn't just hurt me, Sarah, I said, my voice steady. You hurt your family. Your friends. You broke the trust of everyone who cared about you. Tears streamed down her face, but I pressed on. Do you know what the worst part is? You didn't give me a choice. You took away my agency. If you had told me the truth from the start, maybe we could have figured something out. But instead, you lied. Over and over again. I know, she whispered, her voice cracking. I was scared. I thought I'd lose you. You lost me the moment you decided to lie, I said firmly. She sobbed into her tissue, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I reminded myself of all the nights I'd spent doubting myself, of all the lies she'd told so easily. I'm moving on, Sarah, I said finally. I suggest you do the same. Focus on the baby. Make things right for them. She nodded, wiping her tears. I'll never forgive myself, she said. That's not for me to decide, I replied. Take care of yourself, Sarah. Goodbye. I stood up and walked away, leaving her sitting at the table, a broken version of the woman I once loved. Back at my apartment, I felt a strange sense of closure. Sarah's downfall wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability. She'd lost the respect of her friends, the support of her family, and, most importantly, the life we had built together. But for me, it was a chance to rebuild. To start over. The weeks after my final meeting with Sarah were transformative in ways I hadn't anticipated. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of clarity. The chaos of betrayal and lies was behind me, and I finally had the space to rebuild my life on my terms. I dove headfirst into creating a new routine. Morning started early with a run along the city's waterfront, the cool breeze a welcome companion as I let my thoughts unravel. Running became a form of meditation, a way to process everything without the weight of anger or sadness clouding my mind. Afterward, I'd stop by a local cafe, the one just down the street from my new apartment. It wasn't fancy, but it had good coffee and a quiet corner where I could sit with a book. I devoured novels I'd long forgotten about, escaping into worlds that felt far removed from my own. One evening, I found myself sorting through an old box of photos. It had been sitting untouched in the corner of the apartment, something I hadn't had the heart to open until then. Inside were pictures of happier times, vacations, family dinners, candid moments of laughter. At first, it was difficult to look at them. The memories felt tainted, as though everything in those photos was a lie. But as I flipped through them, I realized that wasn't entirely true. There had been good moments, real ones, even if they were overshadowed by what came later. I kept a few photos, ones that reminded me of who I was before everything fell apart. The rest, I tucked away, not out of bitterness but because I no longer needed them. Friends began reaching out more frequently as word of my separation spread. Emily checked in often, her messages a mix of support and updates on how the others were handling the fallout. Pam's still struggling, she said during one call. She's furious at Sarah but doesn't know how to move forward. I think it's going to take time. I wished Pam well, but I didn't dwell on it. Their relationship was theirs to navigate. My focus was on moving forward, not looking back. About a month after the dust had settled, I decided to revisit something I'd been putting off for years: travel. I booked a solo trip to the mountains, a quiet retreat where I could hike, breathe fresh air, and disconnect from everything. On one of those hikes, standing on a ridge with the sun setting in brilliant shades of orange and pink, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. It wasn't just the view or the solitude, it was the realization that I'd survived. I'd made it through the worst of it, and I was still standing. Back home, I started focusing on small, tangible goals. I took a cooking class, where I learned how to make pasta from scratch. I volunteered at a local shelter, spending weekends helping organize donations and talking to people who'd been through far worse than I had. Bit by bit, my life began to feel like mine again. The last loose end was the divorce, which was finalized without much resistance. Sarah had signed the papers, and the paternity test confirmed what we already knew. Evan stepped in as the father, but I didn't follow what happened after. That chapter of my life was closed. One day, as I walked home from work, I found myself smiling for no particular reason. It wasn't a big moment or a life-changing revelation, it was just a feeling. A simple, quiet joy that told me I was going to be okay. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough.